So this happened back when I was still running a route out of Amarillo, hauling for a company that had me doing what's called a meet and turn with a driver based out of the Tulsa side. If you don't know trucking, basically it works like this. Instead of one guy driving the whole route there and back, which burns hours and keeps you away from home longer, two drivers meet in the middle. You swap trailers, turn around, go back to your own city. I'd been running that particular route for maybe 4 months at that point, long enough that it had stopped feeling like anything special. Just another Tuesday, another Thursday, whatever night it happened to be. The spot we used to meet at was this gravel lot off an exit ramp behind an old farm equipment place that had shut down years before I ever started running the route. No lights out there. Nothing around it except a boarded-up diner that used to serve truckers before the interstate got rerouted, somewhere in the 80s probably, judging by the state of the sign. Half the letters gone. I always thought it was a strange spot for a meet point, honestly, but it worked, and nobody ever questioned it, so we kept using it. Here's the thing that always bugged me a little, though never enough to actually do anything about it. I always got there way before the other guy, every single time. Didn't matter if I left 10 minutes late or drove a little slower, I'd still beat him by close to an hour. Never figured out why. Maybe his dispatch had him stopping more. Maybe he liked a longer coffee break, I don't know. Point is, I got used to having that hour to kill, and I got in the habit of just backing into the same corner of the lot, killing the engine, and stretching out across the seat for a quick nap before he showed up. The night I'm talking about, it was late October, cold enough that you keep the window cracked instead of all the way down, but not full-on winter cold yet. There was fog sitting low in that lot when I pulled in, just hanging there a few feet off the ground, and my headlights kind of skimmed across the top of it, which I remember thinking looked almost nice. In a weird way. Backed into my spot like always, cracked the window an inch, laid down. Wasn't asleep more than 10 minutes, maybe less, when a dog started barking somewhere. Didn't think anything of it at first. I mean, it's rural Oklahoma at 3 in the morning. There's gonna be some dog barking at something somewhere. That's just how it goes out there. I put my arm over my eyes, figured it'd stop. It didn't. If anything, it got louder. And it kept getting closer. Which is the part that started actually bugging me, because there's a difference between a dog barking way off in the distance and a dog barking that's clearly heading your way. Getting louder every few seconds, like it's closing in on something specific. After about 5 minutes of this, I sat up, more annoyed than worried at that point, honestly. My thinking was some stray had wandered off one of the farms nearby and decided my truck was worth barking at for whatever reason dogs do that. Figured I'd knock on the glass, maybe start the engine and rev it a little, scare it off. Except the barking wasn't just near the truck anymore. It was right outside it, like right up against the door. I leaned over toward the window to look. There was a man standing there. I don't know how else to say it. A grown man, mid-30s maybe, big guy, wearing some kind of dark jacket, close enough to the glass that if the window had been down, I could have reached out and touched him without stretching. And he was barking. Not yelling, barking. Like an actual dog would, these short, sharp bursts, head snapping forward a little each time. His eyes were wide open in this way that didn't match anything else going on with his face, and there was some kind of foam or spit at the corner of his mouth. I could see it even in the dark. I sat there for I don't even know, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. Just completely frozen, staring at him through the glass, and my brain just would not process it. It wasn't even fear yet, not right away. It was more like my head just didn't have a folder to put this in. You know that feeling? where something's happening right in front of you and your body just hasn't caught up to what your eyes are already seeing. Then he barked again, way louder this time, and slammed his hand flat against the window, and that's when my body finally caught up. I didn't jump, didn't yell, nothing like that. Something in me, and I've thought about this a lot since, 20-something years of driving does something to your instincts. I guess something told me not to make any sudden moves. So I moved slow, reached down without taking my eyes off him, found the key still in the ignition, turned it over as gentle as I could, like I was trying not to startle something rather than trying to get away from it. He didn't back up when the engine caught. If anything, he leaned in closer, and the barking dropped into something lower, almost a growl, coming out of a full-grown man's chest, which is a sound I still think about sometimes when I can't sleep. I put it in gear and started rolling forward slow, tires barely even crunching the gravel, and I watched him the whole time in my side mirror. He came after the truck, not sprinting or anything dramatic like that, jogging, and part of the time. I know how this sounds. I've told maybe 3 people this story in my life, and I still don't love saying it. Part of the time he was down on all fours, hands slapping into the dirt, keeping pace with me like that was just a normal way for a person to move. Kept up for longer than I would have guessed, before the fog finally ate him up behind me. I didn't stop at the lot, drove straight through it, out onto the frontage road, and didn't slow down till I hit a gas station lit up about 3 miles up the highway. Called dispatch from the parking lot, told them I needed a different meet spot going forward. Didn't explain why. Not sure I could have explained it in a way that would have made sense coming out of my mouth. My turn driver rolled into that gas station about 40 minutes later, a little confused about the sudden change of plans. I asked him, trying to keep it casual, if he'd ever seen anything weird out at that lot behind the old diner. He got quiet for a second, longer than felt normal. Then he said that spot had a bit of a reputation among some of the older guys who'd been running routes longer than either of us, but people mostly kept quiet about the specifics. I never pushed for more, and I never went back to that lot again, not once, for as long as I kept driving that route. This one still bothers me more than I like admitting, and it happened a lot more recently than the last one, maybe 6-7 years ago now. I was running a load out toward the California border, cutting through Nevada on the 15 sometime around 3 in the morning, which, if you've never driven that stretch at that hour, it's about as empty and dark as driving gets in this country. No real town lights for miles. Just your own headlights and whatever's coming the other direction, which most nights is next to nothing. I'd picked up 3 black SUVs somewhere behind me, maybe an hour before this all happened, big ones, all matching. Driving close together but not close enough to look like they were trying to hide that they were together, if that makes sense. I noticed the plates, because I notice plates, it's just a habit you pick up doing this job long enough, and these were Nevada plates, and they were sequential. 1, 2, 3, in order, one right after the other, single digits. Now, I don't know a ton about how Nevada does their plate numbering, but I know enough to know you don't usually see 3 vehicles running together with plates that clean and that close in sequence, unless somebody arranged it that way on purpose. That's not really something that happens by accident. For about an hour, they just sat back there behind me, keeping a pretty consistent distance, never passing, never falling too far behind either. I didn't think a whole lot of it at first, other than clocking it as a little odd. You see all kinds of things out on that highway at 3 in the morning, and most of it means nothing. Then all 3 of them pulled off. Not at an exit, not at any kind of turnoff I recognized, and I want to be honest, I know that stretch of the 15 pretty well by that point. I'd run it plenty of times. There's no mile marker there, no sign, no gas station, no rest stop, nothing that would explain a road existing in that spot. It was just dirt, a gap in the brush wide enough for a vehicle, cutting off into the dark on the passenger side of the highway. And all three SUVs turned onto it together, one after another, real smooth, like they'd done it 100 times before and knew exactly where they were going. I slowed down without really deciding to. Just eased off the pedal a little, watching my mirrors, watching that gap in the brush go by on my right. And then all three of them killed their lights. At the same time, not one after another like you'd expect, if three separate drivers made three separate decisions all at once, like flipping a single switch. 1 second, I could see 3 sets of taillights bumping down that dirt path, and the next second, there was just nothing back there. Just dark scrub brush, and whatever that path led into, swallowed up like it had never been there at all. I want to tell you I kept driving. That would have been the smart thing, the sensible thing. And for about 4 or 5 seconds, that's exactly what I did. Foot still on the pedal, eyes flicking between the road ahead and that black gap shrinking in my mirror. But there's a thing that happens to you out on those long, empty stretches sometimes. This itch you get. And I don't know if it's curiosity or something dumber than that. But I eased off the gas a little more, and by the time that turnoff was almost behind me, I'd already made the decision without really deciding anything. I pulled over onto the shoulder, maybe a 1/4 mile past where they'd turned off, hazards on, and I just sat there a minute, telling myself I was checking my logbook or stretching my legs or some other reason that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was I wanted to know what was down that path. I've thought about that decision a lot since then, and I still can't tell you exactly why I made it, other than something about the whole thing didn't sit right, in a way that made me want answers instead of making me want to leave, which in hindsight is probably backwards from how a person should react. I got out, walked back along the shoulder toward the turnoff, staying up near the brush line where it was darker. And I stood there at the edge of that dirt path for a good while, just looking down it. There was no moon that night, or not much of one, and past maybe 30 feet, the path just disappeared into black. No lights, no engine sound, no dust settling, which struck me as strange too, because 3 vehicles just went down a dirt road, and there should have been dust hanging in the air. At least a little. And there wasn't any that I could tell. It was like they'd rolled through wet pavement instead of dry desert dirt. I stood there long enough that my legs started aching from the cold, and I never saw a single light come back on. Never heard an engine turn over again, never heard voices, nothing. Just this long dirt path running off into nothing, like it led somewhere that didn't want to be found. Or maybe like it didn't lead anywhere at all and those 3 SUVs had just stopped existing the second their lights went out, which I know doesn't make any logical sense. But standing out there at 3 in the morning, logical sense wasn't really doing much for me. Eventually the cold got to be too much, and I talked myself into walking back to my truck. I climbed up into the cab, sat there another minute with the engine idling, staring at that gap in my side mirror, and then I just drove on, finished the run, delivered the load on schedule like nothing happened. I've driven that same stretch of the 15 probably 30 or 40 times since then, always around that same hour, because that's just when my schedule has me running it. And I want to tell you, I found that turnoff again at some point. Found some explanation, a checkpoint or a ranch road or something boring that would make the whole thing make sense. I never found it again, not once. I've looked too more than I probably should admit, slowing down in that stretch, trying to spot that same gap in the brush, and it's just never there. Just solid scrub and highway shoulder, mile after mile, like whatever that path was only opens up for certain vehicles on certain nights, and mine wasn't supposed to be one of them. I spent almost 9 years working as a transportation broker before I got out of the industry entirely, and there's exactly 1 year I still think about more than any of the others put together. That was the year our company landed a string of federal contracts, moving what the paperwork only ever referred to as undisclosed hazardous materials. I know how vague that sounds, and honestly, it was supposed to sound vague. We weren't given specifics either, not really. We were just given rules, and told to follow them without asking a whole lot of questions, which in this line of work isn't as unusual as people might think. You broker enough loads, you learn there's a whole category of freight that exists in a kind of gray zone, where your job isn't to understand the cargo. It's just to make sure it gets from one point to another without anything going wrong. The rules on these particular loads were stricter than anything I dealt with before or since. Every trucking company we brokered these to had to sign confidentiality agreements before we'd even release the pickup details. The drivers themselves weren't told the destination until they were already on the road, which used to strike me as backwards, honestly, but that's how it was set up. We had to report status updates to an internal agency every single hour, on the hour, no exceptions, and every one of these loads ran with a 2-driver team specifically, so the truck never had to sit still for long. That was the big rule, actually, the one that got hammered into us over and over during training. These trucks were not permitted to stop moving for more than 30 minutes at any point during the entire route. Not for fuel, not for a bathroom break, not for anything. And under no circumstance were the drivers allowed to open the trailer. Every truck had GPS tracking paired with a running timer that flagged the second a vehicle went idle past that 30-minute mark. I never asked what happened if that timer tripped. Something in the way our contact from the agency talked about it made it clear that wasn't a question I wanted an answer to. We ran probably 24 of these loads that year without a single issue. Trucks rolled out, trucks rolled in, hourly check-ins came through clean. Nobody thought twice about any of it after a while. It becomes routine, even something that strange. That's the thing about this job. Almost anything becomes routine if you do it enough times without incident. Then came the one day that wasn't like the others. It was a Tuesday, I remember that much, because Tuesdays were usually my slow day for new bookings, and I was catching up on paperwork when the call came in. One of our 2-driver teams was running a load out of a facility in New Mexico, headed toward a location we weren't given, same as always, and everything had been clean for the first 11 hours of the route. Clean check-ins, steady progress, nothing flagged. Then the 12 o'clock update didn't come through. We had a 15-minute grace window built into the reporting schedule, mostly to account for dead zones out in the middle of nowhere, which happened more than you'd think on some of these desert routes. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I remember sitting at my desk, watching the clock, telling myself it was just a signal issue, because that's usually what it was. At the 25-minute mark, my supervisor came over to my desk without being asked, which alone told me this wasn't normal, because that man did not leave his office for anything short of a real problem. We got the GPS data pulled up on the shared monitor in the office, and the truck had stopped. Not slowed down, not pulled over, briefly stopped, completely still, sitting on a stretch of 2-lane highway in the middle of New Mexico, with nothing around it for miles according to the map. No town, no exit, no rest stop. Just a straight road running through open desert, and our truck sitting dead center of it, not moving. The timer hit 30 minutes while we were all still standing there watching the screen. Nothing happened that I could see. No alarm went off on our end, no obvious system response, but our contact from the agency called our office line less than 90 seconds after that 30-minute mark passed, before we'd even had a chance to call them first and asked for the exact coordinates and immediate confirmation that no one had opened that trailer. I remember that question specifically because of how fast it came, like it was the only thing that actually mattered to them in that moment. Not why the truck stopped, not whether the drivers were safe, just whether that trailer had been opened. We couldn't answer that. We had no way of confirming anything from our end beyond the GPS ping. Radio contact with the drivers had gone dead at almost the exact same moment the truck stopped moving, which our dispatcher tried explaining away as a dead zone too. Except this particular stretch of highway hadn't given us any radio trouble on any of our previous runs through it. Not once. The truck sat there, motionless, for 11 more minutes according to our tracking. I watched that dot on the screen the entire time, along with 3 other people in that office, nobody saying much of anything. Just watching a stationary blip on a map like it was going to tell us something if we stared hard enough. Then, without any call from the drivers, without any explanation given to us before or after, the truck started moving again. Same speed as before, same route. Like nothing had happened. The hourly check-ins resumed on schedule after that, clean as anything, right through to final delivery. When I finally got one of the drivers on the phone 2 days later, after the load had been dropped and the team was back home, I asked him directly what happened out there on that stretch of highway. He was quiet for a second, longer than felt natural over the phone, and then he told me the truck had stalled out. Engine trouble, nothing more. Said his co-driver got it running again within the half hour and they'd continued on schedule, same as always. I want to tell you I believed him. I've turned that conversation over in my head more times than I can count since, and there was something in how flat his voice went right at that part of the story, like he was reading it off a card rather than remembering it. And there was another detail that never sat right with me either. Something small that I didn't think much of at the time, but that stuck with me since. When those trucks came back into our yard after every completed run, they always came back with a certain amount of road grime built up along the lower half of the trailer, consistent with whatever terrain that route ran through. This particular trailer came back clean along the bottom 2 feet, like it had been recently washed, or like it hadn't touched that stretch of highway at all in the same way the rest of the truck clearly had. I never asked either driver about that detail. I'm not sure I wanted an answer badly enough to risk hearing one. I left that job about 8 months later, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, and I've never worked another contract involving anything labeled undisclosed since, not because I was told not to, but because I decided on my own that some loads are better left to somebody who isn't asking the questions I'd already started asking myself.